Hi, this is Becca from Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Read. I'm here today with poet, LCSW therapist, Kansan, man who is almost 6 feet tall. This is Eric. Say hi, Eric.
Hello.
I'm talking to Eric today because I want to know more about what it's like to be the husband of a high-volume romance reader. Specifically, what it's like to be my husband. I feel like I can talk to you about these novels in detail, but I always feel awkward gushing about characteristics of male main characters that clearly you don't inhabit. Like, I don't think anyone would call you an alpha male, let alone an alpha whole. Which is not to say that you don't have presence, and you don't have gravitas, and that you don't have command and power. I'll talk about male characteristics that are more aggressive and hypermasculine or even toxic or bestial. I remember I made that id list a while back where I was talking about basically all the things that I'm trash for. And most of the list was me talking about what kind of men in these books I was trash for. And I asked you to read the id list without even thinking about how it would make you feel for me to go on for that long about, I love it when a man does this, I love it when a man does that. And I felt terrible afterwards. I think I should have been more careful. But how do you feel when I'm talking about men who aren't like you?
The things I feel like I remember you gushing about, which I don't think you actually do that much. I don't feel like you gush about male characters in these books very much. I feel like you'll talk about situations, scenes that were really meaningful. And they're never things that feel like you absolutely need them, and they're things I could never do or be. Like, you talked about the liar line as being a moment that's really exciting.
When a man calls a woman on her BS, she says something, she denies her feelings, and he smiles and says liar.
Yeah. I can think of a moment or two in our relationship where that's happened and you talked about how that felt good.
It's hot when someone I'm in love with does that.
Yeah.
I definitely feel seen. It's exciting to be caught and to be held accountable for your BS. Yeah, I love it when you call me on my BS.
And those are things that could happen and have happened. I think they're, probably relatively uncommon to happen between us. But
yeah, because I don't have any BS anymore.
Liar.
Nor you.
But,
well done.
Thank you. But, I have no memory of you gushing about a character in a way that made it clear that it put your desire out of my reach or something like that. I've never heard you talk about, oh, God, just this burning desire for somebody who towers over you, who's like over 6 feet and has dark, thick, curly hair and stuff like that. I've never heard you talk about something that you seem to have a deep need for that I just am not and could not be. I think there are things that you like that are kind of out of character for me, but they're not out of reach.
Well, you're not a billionaire.
That's true, but I've never heard you gush
and
about...
you've never kidnapped me.
Nah, yeah.
And what else? What else have you not done? You're not in the mafia.
Yeah.
But I guess you could get a tattoo or 3.
Yeah. These are all things that I could do without surgical alteration. Although surgical alteration might be easier than becoming a billionaire.
Still, your response is in some ways very intellectual. I don't know how you internalize that thinking. There must be a very human part of you that feels insecure despite what you know. I mean, is that not true?
I would if I felt less secure with you. That makes a huge difference. I think in previous relationships, if the person I was with started suddenly consuming a lot of romance, I think I would feel threatened by that. But I trust you to talk about any problems before we are irretrievably steeped in them or at a point of no return. And I see how this stuff has been exciting for you, nourishing for you. You talk to me about it with interest and passion. It doesn't sound like you're talking to me so much about what you need in your life and what is missing. And I think if you were, we would be talking about it.
Yeah. I think that there's also a sort of a distance that I can have when I talk about romance novels because of the background as a writer and as a teacher of writing and as a close reader of writing and as an academic, I'm often thinking about the craft of romance writing. It is really difficult for me to turn off some part in my brain that is reading very closely and looking at what these authors are doing. And yeah, now that I think about it, usually when we're talking, I'm talking about what this author did.
Yeah.
And I imagine, too, that must be helpful, that there are signs that this is not just about the feelings that I need, but also the analytical stimulation, the curiosity.
Yeah, I do feel like when you're describing a scene to me that's really hot, that it's almost never 100%, God, I want this to happen to me. It's like, look at how this writer created this amazingly hot scene, or look what they did here. And I think that this is obviously attached to things that you find really exciting. But one thing that comes to mind is, like, because I have been speaking very abstractly, and I think a good thing that actually happened between us is that I have asked you, is there anything that you do feel like you're missing that you would like more of? And I don't remember you ever saying anything that was like, this is really important, this is something I need, but you have talked about things like, I really like wrestling, you know? And we talked about how, like, that's tricky for me because there's something about that kind of feels like there's some rejection in it. So that's my BS, right?
It's not BS.
Well, I mean, it's my own sort of hang up, is that if we are wrestling as foreplay, there's something about that resistance that feels like rejection somehow. And it didn't feel, though, like you were saying, Eric, I need this from you, and I was saying, I can't give it to you. And it didn't feel like a big problem between us. I don't think that we're done with that.
Are you saying there's still hope for wrestling in the future?
We're going to have some hot wrestling in the future is what I'm saying.
We're going to have to figure out how to do that. As mentioned before, you're a therapist. You do couples therapy, you do individual therapy, many different kinds of individual therapy. And I did an essay about the therapist-patient taboo romance trope. My ode to that romance, even though I acknowledge just how messed up it is. And as a therapist, was there something weird about me going on at length about... I want to make this very clear. When I met Eric, he was not a therapist. He was a graduate student studying English. Psychiatry and psychology wasn't even a glint in his eye. What is the phrasing? It wasn't even something that he had considered.
Yeah.
But as a therapist, hearing your wife prattling on at length, me, my zeal for therapist-patient romances, what kind of ideas, what kinds of thoughts, if anything, did it stimulate in you?
It didn't make me worry or anything like that. In fact, I think it was really interesting to think about, because one thing I'm struck by is that when you talk about therapists who have inappropriate relationships with their clients, a really common response to that among therapists is condemnation and disgust, right? Don't do it. You shouldn't do that, right? You shouldn't have those inappropriate relationships. But it is also, from what I understand, the number one reason for complaints against therapists to regulatory boards against a therapist license. And so I think that most therapists seem to respond in a way that says, I would never. And yet it's the most common reason, then we're not considering something important. And I think the obvious important thing is that there is a really deep intimacy that therapy makes possible. And, you know, it's in some ways a kind of one-way intimacy, but only in the sense that only one of you knows a whole lot about the other.
Ideally.
Yeah, ideally.
There are definitely therapists that self-disclose.
Oh, yeah. I mean, hopefully, even a therapist who self-discloses a lot, the client's the one that is talking about themselves more, but I've heard of outlier cases. But it can feel really wonderful to be in a conversation with somebody where they are showing you the most important and emotionally significant parts of themselves. You know, you're feeling things in a room together, and there can feel like there is a deep intimacy going on there in some ways. And I think if you are somebody who feels a lack of intimacy in your life, if you're a therapist who feels a lack of intimacy in your life, I imagine that could be deeply seductive. And to say, I'm too good of a person to do that, I know better, then I think that puts you in danger of getting caught in an emotional place that you didn't anticipate and never prepared yourself for. And it opens you up to the danger of saying, this feels too important and too meaningful, it must mean something. And in a way, I think we ought to treat it as just an occupational hazard in a way. Not even necessarily an occupational hazard. Emotional intimacy is the thing we're doing in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of deep feeling that happens in the room, and that one of our jobs is to not confuse that for romance, for friendship. I mean, in some ways, you're using the same parts of yourself that you do in real friendship, but there are limits on it, and there are limits for a reason. And we talk about this stuff in ethics all the time for a reason. You have to have these guardrails. How are you feeling about that, by the way?
Guardrails?
About all that stuff I said I'm talking to you about. Deep feelings happening in the therapy room.
I think a lot about, and there are millions of memes and jokes about this, and I wish I'd included this in the video essay. In fact, I wish I'd done a million different things with that video essay. Nothing but regrets. Oh well. But I think whether or not you're in love with your therapist, whether or not you're turned on by your therapist, I think deep down, most clients of therapists want to be their therapist's favorite client.
Yeah.
And so even if you're not romantically inclined, even if you're not sexually inclined, there is something bewitching about the idea of being your therapist's favorite. And I think that can come from a similar place. This idea that not only is your ugliness not off-putting, not only is your ugliness, and when I say ugliness, I mean ugly feelings, like tough stuff. Not only is it not off-putting, not only is it actually compelling, but everybody else's ugly stuff, everybody else's vulnerability, everybody else's cards that they lay on the table isn't as compelling.
Yeah. We want to be special. Feeling seen that way is wonderful. It's something that we all want, I think, even if we have a lot of defenses about it and say, I don't want it. It's something we really want, and we want to feel special. And one of the ways that we like to think of ourselves as being special is being number one, being the most something, being the most special.
Yeah, the therapist has the ability to engage with empathy and complexity with all of their clients. So it would not be unique for that therapist to empathize with you, or to see something good in you, or to want good things for you, or to desire to help you in a way that is very active. But then you could say, well, my therapist wants that for all their clients. And it almost sort of dismisses that it's about you. You could say, yes, this person wants all these things for me, but that's their job. And I think that's another thing people often say, is that there's pain in the fact that the person who cares about the most in the world is being paid to do so.
Yeah, it would be an understandable desire or fantasy that I could be special enough that this person would step out of their professional role.
Well, yeah, but also sort of like, I'm the only one who it isn't about them doing their job. I often think about how you could make relationships with a variety of women work well. You're an incredibly flexible, adaptive, patient, caring, thoughtful, empathic, responsible partner. And I often think Eric could be with any number of women and it would work. He would make it work because of those strengths. And I'm often like, given how you have that empathy and that ability to connect with so many people, the fact that you want me blows my mind. It doesn't make any sense to me, because with me comes a lot of baggage and a lot of frailties that must be very annoying. But it is a major compliment that you, who could really do just fine with anyone, and definitely could do just fine with a healthier, stable person with a real job, and who wasn't inclined to blow what paycheck she has on this week's drop of fidget slime. But you're not my therapist who's choosing me, but you are someone who feels things bigly and lovingly for damn near anyone in his life. And yet I'm the one that it's different with, or different for.
Yeah, we've been together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let's wrap up. Do you have any questions or anything that you want to talk about?
Do you feel like reading all of this romance has changed anything for you? Either what you realize about yourself, or how you feel about sex, love, relationships, any of it? Have you seen anything change in you?
I'm happier.
Where does that come from?
Well, I think they're happy novels. It does something to the brain. Love, just feelings of love and the excitement of love and all those things. There's a neurochemistry to it. And again, that in and of itself sounds a bit dismissive, but that kind of escape, or those kinds of challenges, or being invested in those kinds of relationships, especially because most romance novels, or at least a lot of the ones that people prioritize, are those that have happily ever afters. So there's that, but also After I left graduate school, after I left teaching, the part of myself that engaged with creative writing just wasn't stimulated anymore. I read a lot of nonfiction, but I didn't read a lot of fiction. And when I found myself in love with this genre, again, because I'd read romance novels before, but when I sort of fell in love with it, it was stimulating something in me that hadn't been stimulated in a long, long time. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people still are dismissive of romance novels as easy, low-hanging fruit. And I, of all the genres to sort of think about in a way that is granularly analytical, I was thinking about this genre that way because of its ability to command such huge feelings. Its ability to make someone laugh and cry and pant like a terrier. These are big things. And I've always been interested in artists who could prompt or call big emotions from people. I was sort of obsessed with stand-up comedy when I was very young because it was so powerful. A person you don't know is saying something, and it could be on a recording. They might not even be in the room, but they say words and you start to convulse.
Yeah.
And there was a power in that. And not only do you start to convulse, but your brain changes. You're happier for their words in a way that seemed to be unique. And I think that something similar was going on with the romance genre is these authors were powerful by definition. They were making me feel things intensely. And I wanted to know how they were doing it. And so it makes me joyful in a way that it makes a lot of romance readers joyful. But it also makes me joyful because I'm back in a headspace that I'd all but abandoned when I left academia. And I thought I was through with that part of my life.
Yeah.
I like the process of looking at this kind of writing seriously and taking these authors seriously, even when they're writing quote-unquote ridiculous books. I'm just amazed. I'm just amazed at what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it feels like it's reawoken. Is that right? It's woken up a part of me that was long dormant that I thought I'd lost.
I really like that, yeah, that stringing words together, and it's possible to do that and bore somebody or annoy them or send them into delight and ecstasy. And I can see how maybe you especially would be intrigued by the power of that and the how of that in a way and really want to dig down into it.
Yeah. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
In my closet.
Yeah.
I love you.
I love you.